Hey everybody, QG here. Well, just about every Total Drama fan I know has given their own reworked thoughts on Total Drama All-Stars in the past or in the present, so I might as well follow suit. So, let's get started. We'll start off with the cast. The conclusion I've come to on reworking the All-Stars cast is that it's not really a proper reworking if I just change the cast size or episode count. Plus, with the most recent season making a 16-character cast work, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think a 14-character cast for All-Stars can also work. Also, I'm keeping the theming of the teams and season the same. Still a heroes team and still a villains team. I think this setup can actually work even if canon All-Stars left a bit to be desired. And in keeping with tradition, that also means I'm going to be sticking to the generation split, meaning 7 characters from Gen 1 and 7 characters from Gen 2. Most people have a big issue with the fact that a good portion of the cast are previous finalists, essentially meaning that they're guaranteed not to win any future seasons. I'm of the opinion that an All-Star season should have Total Drama, All-Stars, and generally that includes past finalists. So I'm not cutting any previous finalists that were already in this season, even though that was a big complaint for All-Stars in general. So we'll start with the Gen 2 cast, which is exactly the same as canon. Sam, Mike, Cameron, and Zoe are on the Hamsters, Lightning, Joe, and Scott are on the Vultures. Having all the mergers from Rhodey just makes sense, and Sam is also a pretty good pick that I can further justify later on. Then that leaves the Gen 1 cast, who will have 6 members remain the same, these being Courtney and Lindsay on the Hamsters, and Duncan, Gwen, Alejandro, and Heather on the Vultures. I've decided to remove Sierra from this season because, frankly, she feels the most replaceable of the entire cast, and as you guys are going to see in a bit, Cameron won't last long enough for Sierra to even have her Cam Cody plot or whatever. So who have I decided to replace Sierra with? Well, let's see who I immediately ruled out first. Katie, Sadie, and Eva were immediately disqualified as they've only ever competed in one season and didn't do that great in said season either. After that, I ruled out Zeke, Noah, Tyler, Justin, Trent, Jeff, and Cody because they simply weren't all-star material or were absent for a season. The only character I made an exception for this ruling with was Beth, as she was a finalist and thus is always a contender for an all-star season regardless how many she was in. Besides, Jeff and Noah get Redonka's race to compete again anyways. This leaves us with DJ, Izzy, Lashana, Harold, Owen, Beth, and Bridget. I think I can safely rule out Izzy, Owen, and Bridget. The former two already cameo this season anyways, and Owen specifically gets Redonka's race to further shine as well. As for Bridget, she just doesn't have the numbers competition-wise to justify her being an all-star. So we're left with DJ, Lashana, Harold, and Beth. The thing is that we can sort of rule out Harold and DJ by default because including them in the cast I've got set up currently would create a cast gender imbalance, and generally it's just a better idea to adhere to that, and the only time I can recall Total Drama has deviated from it was in Revenge the Island, but that was only because the cast number was odd numbered. So that leaves us with Beth and Lashana. I think you could justify either of these characters being in this season, but in the end I think I'm going to go with Beth. There's multiple reasons for this, Beth having been a finalist, her needing more screen time since she didn't compete in World Tour, and just generally being more likely to want to return compared to Lashana. But in general, the main reason is because I think she'd just play off the Hamsters much better than Sierra ever did. I could see her and Sam or Cameron getting along pretty well, she's already friends with Lindsay, she's already rivals with Courtney, and when Duncan switches to the Hamsters, that's yet another character she can bounce off of. So there we go. Beth, Courtney, Lindsay, Sam, Mike, Zoe, and Cameron for Team Hamsters, and Duncan, Heather, Gwen, Alejandro, Joe, Scott, and Lightning for Team Vultures. Now onto the elimination order and general plot stuff. Starting off, I'm going to be skipping over Lindsay and Lightning because there's pretty much nothing I'd actually change about these two or their eliminations. I think they were handled very well in canon. For the third elimination of the season, the votes end up tied between Heather and Alejandro for being deemed the biggest threat, so they get put in a tiebreaker challenge. It's here that Alejandro reveals he can already walk again and easily takes out Heather, and Courtney and Duncan still swap teams this episode. For the fourth elimination, we have the first victim of Mal in Cameron. His glasses get broken and he's sent over to Team Villain in episode 4. In this episode, Al also gets sent over to Boney Island, since the villain team would have won that episode, where he finds the immunity idol. Cameron and Alejandro are the only two to receive votes in episode 5, but since Al has the idol, Cameron gets eliminated. In episode 6, Mal continues plotting behind the scenes, secretly sabotaging Alejandro by doing things like slicing his boots' heels to make them uneven and knocking eggs out of his hands, that kind of thing. He also proceeds to let the other vultures know that Alejandro is slacking behind. Joe also campaigns with the rest of the team to get Alejandro booted so she can take on the team leadership role unopposed, leading to Alejandro getting eliminated. Similarly to Cameron, Mal breaks Beth's glasses in episode 7 too, but she manages to repair them herself. He then instead decommissions Beth either prior to the start of the challenge or during the challenge by sabotaging her round. She's voted out for botching the challenge and due to just not having enough close allies. From here we get to the merge, which if you're keeping track consists of Courtney, Sam, Mike, Zoe, Duncan, Gwen, Joe, and Scott. In episode 8, Duncan largely goes out the same way as Cannon, breaks up with Gwen the same way. Honestly, I wouldn't really change anything about Duncan, Gwen, or Courtney prior to this episode from Cannon. I think they were handled very well up to that point. However, Mal has been getting in Duncan's head a bit too by reverse sabotaging his attempts at being bad, even graffitiing his clothes to be lighthearted and kitty and stuff like that. He's also the one that encourages Duncan to show that he's still bad and lends him the dynamite he used to blow up Chris's cottage. Mal found this dynamite when he fought the blind mole rats in the previous challenge. Through each previous episode, Mike has been traversing his headspace and making amends / freeing his non-Mal alters. Meanwhile, Mal has been discreetly taking down prior finalists as a means to highlight how dangerous he is. Instead of gathering together to traverse a tower, Mike would actually delve into memories of his alters first being formed and would use the knowledge he gained to figure out how to stop Mal. So Mike would be AWOL starting with episode 4, he'd confront Chester in episode 5, Svetlana in episode 6, Vito in episode 7, Manitoba in episode 8, and finally Mal in episode 9. By episode 9, Mike manages to delve into how Mal was formed and manages to temporarily stop him from dropping boulders on Zoe. After all, this would be the Zeke and Ye Shall Find 100th episode celebration after all, so it makes sense that Mal would attempt to do something like that to Zoe. Either the boulder can land on him, causing him to go home due to injury, or he can just leave after the challenge as a way to make up for all the trouble Mal caused and reunite with his family and maybe Cam to help him continue sorting through his disorder and to prevent any more flare-ups of Mal. I want to make it clear that none of Mike's alters are getting erased or deleted in this rewrite, including Mal. From the beginning of the season, Sam realizes he's the least all-star worthy contestant there, but uses it to fuel himself to prove that he is an all-star. He gets encouragement and tips from other characters such as Beth, who feel like they were in similar positions before. He makes it far, but is ultimately undermined by Joe, who sees his rising potential, something she previously saw in Cameron, and deemed him a bigger threat as underestimating competitors like Sam was her downfall last time. This episode is also when Courtney's chart would be revealed, so votes are relatively split across the board, but Joe convinces Scott to vote Sam instead of Courtney. Courtney is also in the bottom 2 here. So basically, the voting would be Courtney voted for Gwen, Gwen voted for Courtney, Joe voted for Sam, Scott voted for Sam, and then from there, Zoe and Sam would vote opposite each other for either Joe or Scott, resulting in Sam getting the most votes. Scott acts largely similarly to how he does in canon, including the plot of Courtney, with a slight change that they explain why he's intact now very early on, being that his bone structure has been semi-repaired with metallics. These cause him to generally be less of a threat during challenges and try to mellow up in general, knowing he's not as strong as he was before. But what causes him to get 5th place is his social game. He's unable to forgive Courtney over the rat drawing, but by episode 11, Gwen decides to give Courtney one more chance, trusting that Courtney would vote for herself in this episode. She won't know for sure if she did until the following episode, but she decides to vote Scott off with Courtney, and Joe and Zoe follow suit, neither really liking Scott that much in general. So basically, at the very least, Zoe, Joe, and Gwen voted for Scott. There's also the alternative idea, which is that Joe is voted off, but managed to get a hold of the immunity idol and uses said immunity to get Scott booted instead. Either way works. During the challenge in episode 12, Joe manages to successfully sabotage Gwen in her hunt for an intact Chris painting, presumably by trapping her in the house somehow. Chris ends up giving her a time limit to return, but Gwen fails to make it back in time and is deemed 4th place. Before Gwen takes the flush, Courtney reveals that she did in fact vote for herself the prior episode and that she's genuinely sorry to Gwen. She solidifies her resolve by quitting the show, taking the flush with her, saving their friendship, and ensuring neither of them ever have to return. Courtney gets third and they take the flush together. Whether or not Courtney occurs as a result of this, I will leave up to the viewer. And with that, your finalists for this improved All-Star season are Zoe and Joe. Throughout the game, Zoe is generally very helpful to her team, saving them from imminent danger constantly, especially Sam in particular, and tries her best to help Mike with his mouthing. Her arc would evolve around independency, or rather her own agency becoming more of a forefront. It would mainly entail not relying on Cameron or Mike as allies to make it further in the game than she would otherwise due to just generally being a strong competitor. But all in all, Zoe just does pretty well in a lot of challenges and helps out her team a lot. She ends up embodying the ideal hero character. As for the other finalists, Joe is playing a more strategic, albeit familiar game to how she did in Revenge the Island. From the very first episode, she attempts to set up alliances with the likes of Lightning and Duncan when she takes charge of the baby stroller, is consistently strategizing how to get out stronger players, going so far as to be a big campaigner for Heather and Alejandro's elimination, as well as ensuring her team doesn't underestimate Cameron when he switched over to Team Villain. After Mal is gone, Joe takes over the role of the antagonist of the season while also ensuring she doesn't make too many enemies in the process. But her arc will revolve around realizing that she can't be a one-person army and that whether she wants to admit it or not, she has to have teammates or cooperate with other people to get much of anything done. Despite this, her run throughout the season is a strong and treacherous one, earning her the role of the villain. The final test for the finalists will come in the finale of the season. Every previous competitor will return to watch the finale play out, and Chris allows each finalist to select one previous competitor to be their helper during the challenge. Zoe chooses Mike and Joe chooses Lightning. After this, Chris reveals a surprise twist, that being that Chris has selected each finalist's second helper. These helpers for each finalist being none other than Anne Maria and Brick, respectively. Mike and Anne Maria being Zoe's helpers, of course, causes her quite a bit of strife, not only because it causes her stress, but because she has to ensure Anne Maria isn't messing with Mike in an attempt to get Vito to front. Meanwhile, Joe's helpers being both Lightning and Brick results in her barely getting much help at all, neither of them choosing to assist them during the challenge. Eventually, Zoe ends up telling off Anne Maria to leave Mike alone, and she does without a hassle, while Joe ultimately decides to apologize to Lightning and Brick for her raw treatment of them, and promising that if she wins, she'll split the money with the both of them. Whether or not she means this is up for debate, but her apology to Brick in particular seems to be sincere enough. In the end, both Zoe and Joe manage to work through their differences with their helpers and ascend to the top for the final showdown, with two endings depending on who you prefer to win the season. So, yeah, that was my Total Drama All-Stars My Way video. I feel like this does not only a much better job in ensuring the season is actually interesting to watch through, but also allows the All-Star season to actually feel special and authentic, and not just something that had to be rushed out to appease Cartoon Network. And with that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this Total Drama All-Stars My Way video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Total Drama content like this. Share this video with your friends to see if they agree or disagree with this rework. And let me know in the comments as well if you like this new attempt at All-Stars or if I just made this season worse somehow. Until the next video, peace.